October 26, 1881, in the town of Tombstone, part of the Arizona Territory. In the heart of the American West, a deadly gunfight broke out on a dusty, vacant lot. It lasted just 30 seconds, but by the end, 3 men would be dead, and it would become the most famous gunfight in American history. The town of Tombstone was founded in 1879 by Ed Schiffen. Ed traveled to an area where prospector Frederick Brunkow had built a cabin near the San Pedro River and discovered silver ore. In 1860, Frederick was found murdered in a mine, and 2 of his workers were also found murdered in the cabin. In 1876, Ed and his crew were attacked by a group of Apaches. 1 man was killed and buried nearby. In 1877, Ed used the old cabin and searched for silver in the surrounding area. He eventually found a vein of silver ore near the grave of the man who was killed the year prior. Ed would name his mining claim Tombstone. At first, everyone he showed the silver ore samples to believed it was worthless, but eventually in 1878 he showed them to assayer Richard Gerd, who thought the best piece of ore was worth $2,000 a ton. Ed, his brother Al, and Richard formed the Tombstone Gold and Silver Mining Company, and they began mining in the area. The town was built right near one of their claims, called Tough Nut Mine. The mines of Tombstone would produce between $40 to $85 million in silver ore. When Tombstone was founded, it had a population of just 100 people. 2 years later, in 1881, the population was between 5,000 and 7,000, excluding immigrants, women, and children. Tombstone had a bowling alley, 2 banks, over 100 saloons, 4 churches, an ice cream parlor, a school, 14 gambling halls, 3 newspapers, an ice house, a swimming pool, a number of theaters, including the Birdcage Theater and Schiffen Hall, the Boot Hill Cemetery, which got its name from the number of men who were buried in their boots, as well as a number of brothels and many, many more businesses. Wyatt Earp had been many things throughout his life: farmer, lawman, possible horse thief, buffalo hunter, gambler, and possible pimp. In 1879, Wyatt Earp left Dodge City, where he was working as a lawman. He had become friends with Bat Masterson and Doc Holliday. Wyatt moved to the boomtown of Tombstone with his partner Matty, his brothers Virgil and James Earp, along with their wives. His brother Morgan followed the next year, as well as Doc Holliday, the dentist turned gambler and friend of Wyatt Earp. Then Warren Earp arrived after Morgan. Virgil was appointed as Deputy U.S. Marshal for the Tombstone District. As the town grew, its occupants fell into different groups. The political elite were mostly the business owners and mine operators. They wanted the town to develop and continue to grow. They were in support of the Lawmen. The Cowboys had been in the area prior to the town being built, dealing in cattle. The Mexico border was only 30 miles away, and cattle theft from Mexico was very common during this time. Not every cowboy was involved in cattle theft. Many of the cowboys and ranchers were upset about how powerful the business owners in Tombstone had become, as well as many of them were from northern states and could influence the laws in the area. Many of the cowboys were from southern states, and with the American Civil War ending just 15 years prior, tensions were still high. Old feuds died slow, and politics in Tombstone divided the population. After Wyatt Earp's arrival in Tombstone, he figured he would open a stagecoach with his wagon and horses he used to get to Tombstone, but he had been too slow. Wyatt gambled in Tombstone, and later he was hired by Wells Fargo as a shotgun messenger. carrying strong boxes on stagecoaches for the company. In 1880, 6 mules were stolen from Fort Rucker. Captain Hearst asked Virgil to help catch the thieves, since Virgil was Deputy U.S. Marshal for the area. Virgil brought along Wyatt and Morgan. This was a federal offense, since the mules were government property. They found the mules at the McLaury's ranch. All of the mules had the U.S. brand on them, while the thieves had changed the brand to say D8. Frank Patterson spoke with Captain Hearst and promised to return the mules as long as the Earps left. But the Cowboys arrived, laughing without the mules. Captain Hearst told the Earps that the Cowboys had threatened their lives and to be careful. When Morgan Earp arrived in Tombstone, Wyatt gave him his job as Wells Fargo shotgun messenger. Wyatt was appointed as a deputy by Virgil in 1880. He had become a lawman once again. Marshal Frank White was friends with Wyatt, and on October 28, 1880, a number of cowboys had been drinking and firing their guns into the air. Frank took it upon himself to take the drunken cowboys' weapons. Wyatt, hearing the commotion, came out to figure out what was happening. Curly Bill Brocious was one of the cowboys shooting into the air. When Frank reached Curly Bill, he told him to give up his weapon. Curly Bill pulled out his weapon and pointed it at Frank. Frank grabbed the barrel and jerked it towards him. Wyatt witnessed this and saw the gun fire into Frank below his waist. Wyatt ran over and smashed his pistol over Curly Bill's head, knocking him unconscious. Curly Bill claimed later that this was an accident. Frank White did not die right away. He was able to give testimony before his death, stating that he thought the gunfire was accidental. During the trial, Wyatt testified that he believed the shooting was also an accident. The court also proved that Curly Bill's pistol had a defect and it could be fired when it was half-cocked. The charges were dropped against Curly Bill Brocious. Even though Wyatt testified in his favor, Bill was upset at being pistol whipped, and he held a grudge. This increased tensions between the Earps and the Cowboys. Virgil was soon appointed town marshal, along with his job as deputy U.S. Marshal. Cochise County was formed in February 1881, and John Harris Behan was appointed sheriff. Wyatt later stated that the two men had made a deal that if Wyatt withdrew his application as sheriff, he would make him undersheriff. But Behan did not keep his side of the bargain. On March 15, 1881, 3 cowboys attempted to rob a stagecoach carrying silver bullion. The driver and a passenger were killed. Robert Paul, the shotgun messenger, fired onto the robbers, and his horse got scared and ran off. Virgil, Wyatt, and Morgan Earp teamed up with the sheriff to search for the robbers. Luther King was arrested, and the sheriff brought him back while the Earps continued to look. They searched for 17 days and over 400 miles. King somehow managed to escape jail, either on his own or with help. Wells Fargo even put up a reward of $3,600. Doc Holliday was actually accused of being involved in the attempted robbery of the stagecoach, and he was later arrested. Because of this, the Earps were even thought of having a hand in the robbery. Big Nose Kate, Doc Holliday's common-law wife, even signed an affidavit against Doc, which she later went back on. Wyatt reportedly made a deal with Ike Clanton and Frank McLaury for the Wells Fargo reward money if they gave information that would lead to the arrest of the robbers. It's said that Ike Clanton wanted the Wells Fargo reward to say dead or alive, so he didn't have to face his friends. But he never got the chance, and the robbers were all killed in other robbery attempts. Another stagecoach headed to Bisbee was held up on September 8, 1881, and the passengers were robbed. Wyatt and Virgil were involved in looking for the robbers. At the scene, they found a boot print that matched Frank Stillwell's. He was assistant deputy to Sheriff Behan before he was fired a few months prior. Virgil arrested Frank and his business partner, Pete Spence, for the robbery. The two men were friends with the Clantons and McLaurys. The charges were dropped, but Virgil arrested them again for federal charges. There was confusion, and the Cowboys thought that they were arrested for a different robbery. Frank McLaury told Morgan Earp that the McLaurys would kill the Earps if they ever tried to arrest Spence, Stillwell, or the McLaurys again. Ike got into an argument with Virgil. Virgil pistol-whipped Ike at around 1 p.m. before the gunfight for having his weapon in town. He had been drinking all night and had lost money in a card game with Virgil Earp, Tom McLaury, and Sheriff Behan the previous night. Virgil took his gun and took him to see the judge. There were reports that Ike threatened the Earps, and they offered him a pistol right there in the courthouse, but Ike declined. Wyatt Earp pistol-whipped Tom McLaury after he saw him with a pistol, which was against city ordinance a few hours before the gunfight. The two men went to see the doctor for their wounds, both being pistol-whipped on separate occasions. Billy Clanton, Frank McLaury, Billy Claiborne, and Wes Fuller arrived in town that afternoon at the Grand Hotel and learned what happened to Tom and Ike. They left with their weapons in search of Tom and Ike. They were required to leave their weapons at the hotel, but the men held on to them. They went to Spangenberg's Gun and Hardware and got more ammo. Virgil went to the Wells Fargo office and picked up a double-barrel shotgun. It was a cold day with snow still on the ground, so Virgil hid the shotgun under his coat so that he didn't alarm the public. The Citizen Safety Committee offered assistance, but Virgil declined. He then went to Hafford's saloon. The Cowboys were seen at the O.K Corral. They then headed towards C.S. Fly's boarding house and photography studio, to the empty lot next door, the same boarding house where Doc Holliday was staying. Miner Reuben Coleman later reported, "I was in the O.K Corral at 2:30 p.m. when I saw the two Clantons and the two McLaurys in an earnest conversation across the street at Dunbar's Corral. I went up the street and notified Sheriff Behan and told them it was my opinion that they meant trouble, and it was his duty as sheriff to go and disarm them. I told him they had gone to the West End Corral. I then went and saw Marshal Virgil Earp and notified him to the same effect. Sheriff Behan went to disarm the men. Ike and Tom said they were not armed. Frank said he would only give up his weapons if Virgil and his brothers were disarmed first. Virgil was told by multiple citizens about the armed Cowboys. Virgil decided to go and disarm the men since it was his duty to do so. Virgil, Morgan, Wyatt, and Doc were all present when Virgil decided. Virgil gave Doc the shotgun in return for Doc's silver-tipped walking stick. Doc hid the shotgun under his coat. The four men walked towards the Cowboys. Sheriff Behan tried to stop them, saying, "For God's sakes, don't go down there, or they will murder you." Virgil claimed Behan also told them he had already disarmed the men. They continued down until they reached the Cowboys. Billy Claiborne and Wes Fuller retreated. Virgil said, "Throw up your hands. I want your guns." Frank McLaury and Billy Clanton drew their guns. Virgil yelled, "I don't mean that." The first shots went off simultaneously. No one knows for sure who fired first. Wyatt fired, hitting Frank McLaury. Billy Clanton was hit next by Morgan and Virgil. Ike Clanton then ran at Wyatt, screaming that he was not armed and he begged that he didn't want to fight. Wyatt replied, "Go to fightin' or get away." Doc Holliday shot Tom McLaury, who was unarmed, with the shotgun and stumbled away. Billy fired, hitting Virgil in the leg, and then fired again, hitting Morgan in the shoulder. Wyatt shot Billy in the chest. Frank fired at Doc Holliday. Morgan and Doc both fired, hitting Frank. Billy, who was badly wounded, tried to reload, but C.S. Fly ran out and took Billy's pistol. This ended the gunfight. The sheriff confronted the Earps and threatened to arrest them, but he let the men go. Frank McLaury, Billy Clanton, and Tom McLaury were dead. Ike Clanton, who was the main cause for the fight, ran as the bullets started to fly. The fight lasted just 30 seconds. There were around 300 people at the funeral for the dead Cowboys. Wyatt, Virgil, Morgan, and Doc were all charged with murder. At the hearing, the judge believed Virgil had acted in his office, and there was not enough evidence to indict the men, and that no laws were broken. He also claimed that Wyatt and Doc had been deputized by Virgil before the gunfight. The gunfight went down in history and is remembered to this day. Tombstone is a popular tourist attraction where up to 500,000 people every year learn about the history of Tombstone and the legendary gunfight at the O.K Corral.